So how do you help somebody who's been through or lived through or is in domestic abuse? Number one, please believe them. I've seen many people say, well, she's probably making it up. We know statistically that reports of abuse being feigned is very low. So I've heard less than between 3 and 5%. So you've got a 95% chance at least that she's telling you the truth. It takes a lot of courage for someone to come forth because they know that it could endanger them more just to tell somebody. So please believe them. Don't minimize it or try to make excuses for him, saying things, well, certainly he didn't mean it. Those kinds of things, that is invalidating her true experience. So the next thing that you want to do is just listen. Don't try to take charge. Don't tell her, well, ooh, you need to get out of there, or, oh, you can't leave. This is a person who has not been allowed to make her own decisions for a long time. And so sometimes they might appreciate the fact that you're trying to take charge, but they need to learn to be their own person and they need to learn to make their own decisions. But also, just telling them to get out, we know that 75% of domestic violence homicides happen after somebody leaves. So we don't want to just tell them to go because it could endanger her more. And she really knows she needs to talk to probably an abuse advocate who can help her decide the best course of action to take. Telling her that she has to stay in a situation can be extremely dangerous too. So really working with somebody who can look at the whole picture and help her come up with the best solution for her situation. But again, loving her, just like Mabel was saying at the beginning, that we love them well when we hold their husbands accountable if they're willing to be held accountable. Educate them on the dynamics of abuse or get them connected with a support group. I know we have them at Called to Peace. I know that Focus Ministries has them. We want them to get educated so that they are able to start sorting out and figuring out the best course of action to take. And then finally, don't betray their confidence. I know Mabel inferred this a little bit at the beginning. But if you go back and talk to her, he has shared with you without her permission. And even then, sometimes they don't realize how much danger it can put them in. You want to be really careful because going to an abuser to talk to him about what has happened and what has been confided in you can actually endanger her a lot more. And so you want to connect them with resources. Advocates, domestic violence service providers, be willing to work with the local domestic violence agency in your community. I would not go to a domestic violence agency when I was getting out myself. I thought that, well, they're all extremely liberal, feminists who are going to try to talk me into a divorce. And that was not the case at all. That is not the case at all. I never went. But I ended up, the Lord provided a job for me in a domestic violence shelter when I was helping a woman back in 1999. So I ended up going in to help her. And while she was talking to the advocate, I just was speaking to somebody who worked there, and I told them a little of my story, and I told them I'd love to volunteer to help them sometime. And about a month later, they called and said, hey, would you be willing to tell your story at our Domestic Violence Awareness Month vigil? And I thought, well, the first thing I thought was, no, I don't speak in public. But I knew God had not allowed me to come through all of that for no reason. And so what happened is I ended up going and speaking, and that led to a job as the spokesperson for that agency. And so that was God, because God put me there to see. I watched Christian women coming into that shelter going, why does my pastor care more about my marriage than my life? Why does my pastor not see what is happening to my children? Why does he keep sending me back to an abusive husband? And I needed to see that. I needed to see also the bad witness it was to the world. And so again, that has completely changed in the last 20 some years, but it was an eye-opening experience for me. Connect them with support groups. We've talked about that. And make sure if you send them to counselors, get counselors who understand the dynamics of domestic abuse and oppression and help them make a safety plan. Again, Focus Ministries has a good one, and most of the national sites on domestic abuse. Number one, how can you help? Also, you want to help encourage them to document the abuse. I've had people say, well, love doesn't keep a record of wrongs, but that is not what it means. It doesn't hold it over your head as almost like a weapon. But if a woman is coming out of a domestic violence situation and she tries to get a protective order, she won't be able to get one if she hasn't documented anything. If she's trying to get custody of her children and to keep them away or to only have supervised visitation, she will not be able to do that without having documentation. And so how would that look? Well, in some states, I don't know your local laws, but here in North Carolina, a woman can record a conversation as long as she's part of it. And she can keep a calendar, she can keep a journal, she can write down incidents and email them to someone so they can keep it safe for her. There are multiple ways to document abuse. If there are bruises, then you can take pictures of the bruises. I would keep them in a safe place because it's very likely that an abuser will destroy them. You want to provide them with practical resources. And this is where I believe that the church can shine. You want to give them, if they need housing, help them with housing. If they need transportation, help them with transportation. Other basic necessities, food, clothing, childcare. So a lot of these women coming out will need to go into the workforce, and they need someone to watch their children while they're going for job interviews or whatever it may be. So this is, again, where I believe that the church can really shine, is providing these practical resources for them. You want to, again, help connect them to resources, accompany them to court. I remember having to go to court, and by the time I did, just for my protective order or things having to do with child custody, when I had to go to court, I was so afraid. At this point, he had tried to strangle me, and I was afraid of even running into him in the parking lot. And even back in those days, they didn't keep the victim and perpetrators apart from one another. And he got right behind me in court one day because I had to drive and go all by myself. I'd moved back to North Carolina, and the court was in Virginia, and he got right behind me and threatened me right there in the courtroom and whispered a threat into my ear. So having somebody there with them will help calm them some and give them the support that they need, because they're probably really afraid to go to court. Encourage them to find their hope in God. I was telling Mabel, we were talking about it before earlier this morning. I don't believe that I would be here without God. He was my source of strength. He was the one that got me out and saved my life, really. There really weren't that many resources around back in those days. And one thing I have found is, after working with probably over 1,000 or somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 victims of abuse, I have found that those who have hope and faith in God just have better outcomes. They have to learn to choose faith over fear, because we are basically overwhelmed and controlled by our fear. And it takes a while to straighten out thinking so that they can begin to hope in Him again. But the ones who have hope and faith, hope is the first step. I hope that God is true. And then what I did is I actually had scriptures in there. There's a database of scriptures in the back of my book and the workbook that I used. And I had many of them printed out, posted all over the walls of my house. And when I felt afraid or really overwhelmed, I would go to one of those scriptures and just say it over and over and over again. I would pray it back to God. I would remind Him of His promises to me. And it changed me over the course of time. I began to have hope again, and because I had really become hopeless. Get trained to be an advocate. Call to Peace Ministries has a year-long advocacy training program. There are 12 different courses over a 12-month period. We have partnered with House of Peace Publications. Dr. Deborah Wingfield has taught these courses with the Colorado Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and at Colorado State University, Pueblo. And she taught master's degree students, counseling students. And basically, it's all research-based. She talks about that and gives lots of examples. And so it's probably the most thorough training I know of. I was trained and became certified with the North Carolina Coalition, but this is just way more meaty